Why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome to the Monday, September 15th, 2014 work session of the City Falls Church City Council. It's a privilege and honor tonight to have our neighbors to the east, our the supervisor for the Mason District, Penny Gross. It's been many years, I think, since you've been here in Falls Church. Is that right? At a City Council meeting. So it's a privilege, and we're delighted to have you here. We appreciate you personally coming out this evening. I know it's a rare occasion. And we appreciate your staff and John Tillman and the rest of the folks who've been working very hard on the Seven Corners Revitalization Plan. We know a lot of hard work has gone into it, and we thank you for coming out this evening to enlighten us in some of the details that we may not know about. We know it's of great importance both to you all, but also to us. We're neighbors, and I think share a lot of commerce back and forth. So this is a very important plan for us as well. And so we thank you again for coming here. Lauren, are you going to take over next, or should we just turn out
the lights when it's time to start? So.
Okay. Well, I tell you, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you, Supervisor Gross. I tell you, before we do that, though, I know you've had occasion to work with some of us on council through the various regional committees and commissions that we're on, but I'm not sure you've had occasion to work with all of us. And I thought maybe we could just start by introducing ourselves. And I know you know Dave Snyder for many years of work together, but Absolutely. Dave Snyder on the end, and Dan Z, I think you also know as well, and Nader Baruch, I'm sure, for many years of working together. But Mary Beth Connolly is a new arrival to City Council, and so hopefully you have an occasion to work with her coming up, and Karen Oliver as well, and then Phil Duncan at the end. So hopefully we'll have a chance to work together on some various endeavors coming up. But why don't I go ahead and turn it over to you, Penny, and thank you again for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Tarter and Vice Mayor Snyder and members of the City Council. We thought we would speak to you from this venue rather than from the podium. This isn't testimony, this is a conversation. And I do appreciate the opportunity to provide information and a status report about the work of the Seven Corners Land Use and Transportation Task Force. As Mayor Tarter said, I'm Penny Gross. I represent the Mason District on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Now, Mason District is unique for many reasons. It is the most diverse, dynamic, and densely populated of the 9 magisterial districts in the county. But it is also bordered, unlike any other county, any other district in the county, it is bordered by 3 other independent jurisdictions: the City of Falls Church, Arlington County, and the City of Alexandria. So any land use and transportation issues along those borders are shared with Fairfax County. Our success is your success. Likewise, our challenges are your challenges. For many years, my constituents, both residential and business, have voiced concerns about the Seven Corners Williston area. Housing stock was aging, retail markets were changing, and transportation was a mess. Little reinvestment was being made in the multifamily housing areas, most of which were built in the late 1940s and 50s. The department stores that formed the foundation of the shopping areas departed from the Seven Corners area, which, like many communities, became the victim of corporate business decisions made elsewhere. And transportation was still a mess. At the same time, we know that the area is still growing. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments data forecasts 1.6 million more residents in the region by 2040, and hundreds of thousands more jobs, most new and replacing retirees in the same time frame. For Seven Corners Williston to remain a vibrant and attractive area to live, work, and do business, and not be left behind in coming decades, the county's comprehensive plan needed new language to guide future redevelopment. In Fairfax County, the comp plan is a guide to future land use. It does not rezone properties. That's an entirely separate public process. In May and June of 2012, I hosted 2 community visioning exercises that essentially performed a SWOT analysis of the area. They were very well attended. One of them had 140 people. Residents and business owners, as well as social service providers and school personnel. And when we distilled everything that was up on those charts on the wall, there were more than 20 pages of discussion comments. Many strengths were identified: convenient location, accessible transportation, diversity, a broad range of housing stock and retail options, history, and sense of community. You identify with those same things, I'm sure. Challenges and areas for improvement also were identified. Aging buildings, poor traffic circulation. I'm certainly glad that made it on the list. If it hadn't made it on the list, we would have been wondering who was paying attention. Pedestrian and bicycle safety, need for more green space, more transit, and general appearance concerns. Following on the visioning exercises, I formed a task force of both residents and business owners or managers, which has spent the last 2 years analyzing conditions, identifying opportunities, looking at best practices, and preparing recommendations for consideration by the county's Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. It has been a very public process. In fact, I will say, because they were appointed by me, I insisted that they follow the sunshine rules of the Commonwealth of Virginia, which meant that all their deliberations had to be in public. No more than 2 could speak to one another unless they were in public. So it's a very public process, well-attended monthly meetings, robust discussions, and lots of public input. I want to thank especially Lauren Bruce of your staff, who attended nearly every task force meeting and also participated in the bus tour and the land use charrette in the June of 2013, and also the transportation charrette with Jim Snyder last November. Falls Church City staff have been involved and very helpful during these 2 years of work by the task force, and I appreciate that. I'm not sure I would have gotten to know Lauren or Jim without this exercise, and that has been very, very helpful. They are terrific staffers. While none of the redevelopment recommendations will involve land in Falls Church City, we know that the transportation network under discussion can have implications for the city and its residents. As I discussed with Mayor Tarter and Vice Mayor Snyder earlier this month, more transit would benefit both of our jurisdictions. The proposals under consideration would create a grid of streets for Seven Corners Wilston, diffusing trips and increasing local connectivity for your constituents as well as for mine. None of the proposals is final. The timeline was extended to allow for some extra meetings to consider public input. The task force is charged with bringing forward its recommendations for comp plan language amendments, and I want to thank the task force, both the residential and the business members, for volunteering more than 2 years of hard work to get to this point. And when I gave them their charge 2 years ago, I told them I wanted them to do an independent evaluation. I did not tell them how to end up. This was their opportunity to do a totally independent work without my coming in and saying, oh, you can't do that. We want it to be very independent. Sometimes it's a little too independent, perhaps, but they had the charge from me, and I said, go to it. Tonight, I've brought some experts to provide more detail and answer your questions. And I'm pleased to introduce John Tillman, who's co-chairing the task force, Tom Bashadny, the director of our County Department of Transportation, and Chris Morley-Nickvar, one of our county transportation planners. Now, also joining us this evening as resources and sitting behind us, but they're not planning to present unless there's a particular question that is in their bailiwick. I believe we are expecting Fred Selden, who is the director of the county's Department of Planning and Zoning. Also, Marianne Gardner, the director of the Planning Division, Kim Rybold, who's a comprehensive planner in the Planning Division, Barbara Byron, Director of the Office of Community Revitalization, her Deputy Director, Elizabeth Haig, and Joanne Phoebe, the Revitalization Program Manager. So I've got a great team behind me. And now I will turn the microphone over to Mr. Tillman, who will provide you with an overview of the task force's work. Thank you. John?
Thank you. Push the button. I did.
Go.
Okay, so my presentation is going to be based on the less is more concept. So I'm going to try to get through this fairly quickly so we can get to the transportation, which I think everybody wants to listen about. So we've been operating since October of 2012, and we decided one of the things we were going to do initially was to get everybody in the task force up to speed on the same level of expertise. What that meant is that We spent the first 9 months of the task force not talking about land use. What we did was we had experts in on a number of different areas to talk to the task force. The task force could ask questions, and everybody could get to the same level of experience. So we talked about current zoning by right, how many trips can be generated by maximizing the current zoning. And by the way, that number is close to what our redevelopment number is, so that's pretty amazing in my opinion. Population demographics, we found that the population inside the Seven Corners area, average family income is $43,000. Fairfax County's average income is $107,000, huge disparity. We looked at economic outlook, how to keep and redo affordable housing, how does the financing work, mixed-use development, how to do it, what do the experts say how to do it, retail, what makes it work, because we know retail is changing nationally. The vibrant streets concept. So you can have retail, but how do you create vibrant streets? And that's a concept that's been developed for the Washington, D.C. area, and now it's gone national. It's a concept many cities around the country are using. We used it here. Activating the grid of streets. How do you do that? Transportation, roadways, mass transit. We had at least 4 county staff presentations on roadways and transit. And NVTC came to the task force 3 times. We talked about their trolley and mass transit proposal for 7. And what we were really focused on was how do you create a metro focused plan, metro-centric plan, we like to say. So one of the ways to get at our problem, and we could click to the next. So that's the red border is the Seven Corners area. Next. This area represents what we believed would be the next 20 to 40 year opportunity areas. All of the Seven Corners area probably wasn't ready to go. We divided it into 3 areas that we thought might be ready. Area 1, which is Area A, is on the north side of 50, adjacent to the Arlington and Falls Church line. The middle area is the B.F. Saul Shopping Center, and the area on the other side of Route 7 that's in gray, that's the Sears site. So those are the areas we thought we should focus on. So after all of that expertise came to the task force, we decided, okay, now we get into land use. So the way we handled that was we created a charrette. The staff put together a way of getting everybody on the task force, plus a lot of community members, plus your members of your staff, members of the Arlington County staff, at a charrette, a number of different tables. Each one of the tables focused on the overall concept, and then they each picked a small area that they focused on, one of the 3 areas. And an amazing thing happened. We came up with very similar concepts by everyone. And it probably had a lot to do with the fact that everybody was at the same level of expertise on all the different topics. The next thing we did after that was we started refining land use. The staff then came in with their basic transportation analysis, which had taken quite a while to do. Then we had a transportation charrette. And from the transportation charrette, we came up with a number of concepts. I mean, we looked at everything from doing roundabouts at Seven Corners, flyover ramps, putting a deck over 50, all kinds of strange. We just let everything out there with possibilities. At the end of that, the staff took all of those options and came back to the task force with 4 proposals. They were based on how to get from service levels E and F, which is what's out there now, to C, D, and E. And so the task force picked a couple of them, the staff refined them, and that's the plan we're working on right now. So what was key for us? Well, first of all, a key for us was to make the plan a metro-centric, metro-focused plan, make it walkable, and create a brand new destination that doesn't exist. This destination right now was a destination 50 years ago, and it's deteriorated to the point where you only go to one store, you park your car, go to one store, get back in your car, and you leave. We want to be able to have it where you pull in, leave your car, and walk around for 2 or 3 hours, go to a number of stores and leave. Or if you live there, don't even get in your car, be able to walk. That was the concept. And we looked at a number of things like Shirlington, Reston Town Center, Mosaic, downtown Falls Church. We looked at a number of things. What makes these areas successful? We needed, in order to redevelop this area, most of the other areas in Fairfax County that have gone through this kind of density have been not necessarily green fields, but have been large tracts of land that had a very poor use on them. Here we've got lots and lots of uses, lots and lots of parcels, and it is a large tract of land. So in order to create incentives for the development community to build something new, to be able to tear down the old and build something new, that's really what our job was. And at the end of the day, it was creating a better Route 7, creating a better intersection, developing BRT and streetcars, light rail for Route 7. And one of the things that I think is useful to take for a takeaway is a new residential development we're talking about here, which is between 4,000 and 5,000 units, is if you use the $100,000 a year number for Fairfax County, that generates over $500 million in new income in that area every year from now on, from whatever that we get to that point. And right now, we're nowhere near that, and that new income will be the spur and the developer for the new streets, the streets we want to create, the grid pattern, the activated street frontages, all the rest of that stuff. It all comes from disposable income, and the only way you get disposable income in, you have to bring in residents. So we feel like there's a lot of clear economic benefits to Fairfax County and to the city as well. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Push. There we go. I'm Tom Bashadny, the Director of Fairfax County's Department of Transportation. As John and Supervisor Gross have alluded to, transportation was a very important part of the plan. And Chris Morley-Nickfar is going to go through the details. But in general, we were trying to come up with a plan that supported the new density that was being proposed for this area. And I want to stress that this was really a multimodal approach to transportation. We weren't just looking for ways to move cars. We really were looking at the bicycle and pedestrian environment, the transit piece of this as well. As Mr. Tillman mentioned, the connection to transit was a very important part of the analysis. We wanted to try and address the congestion that exists there at Seven Corners, recognizing that the current comprehensive plan does allow for additional growth over the next several years and next several decades, but the transportation plan that we currently have probably is not going to support that. We recognize that Route 50 is a huge barrier to this area, really separates the north and south part of Seven Corners, and so our plan does include 3 new multimodal connections across Route 50 to support a variety of transportation improvements in that area to kind of bridge that gap. We also recognize that it was necessary to diffuse the traffic. Right now, if you're traveling through this area, you probably have to either be on Route 7 or cross it, or you have to be on Route 50 or cross it. What we want to try and do is provide some additional paths so that the traffic can be dispersed, and also to make the area more convenient for pedestrians to walk around the area. So one of the things that you'll see in the plan is smaller blocks to try and address that. We recognize the importance of access to transit. We do provide in the plan for a fairly direct connection between Seven Corners and the East Falls Church Metro, and we recognize that NVTC, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, is working on a study that we've been participating in with the city on a higher quality transit for Route 7 itself. And so we recognize that that will have to be incorporated when those recommendations are available. The new traffic plan actually results in fewer trips on North Roosevelt Street than the current comprehensive plan would allow or would facilitate. And so we believe that's a very positive aspect of the plan. One of the things, though, that we recognize is that we haven't resolved all the issues. As I mentioned, there's a need to incorporate in the future the NVTC recommendations on Route 7. We recognize that there's additional work that we need to do with the city on those gateways that go between the city and the county. So what we're proposing to Supervisor Gross is that there be a series of what we call follow-on motions that would go with the approval of the plan. And those follow-on motions would include incorporating that NVTC transit study for Route 7 when it's complete, and incorporating those recommendations to establish a staff working task force between the city and the county to look more closely at those gateways and make sure that they are functioning the way that they'll need to be functioning. Also to come up with a financing plan to to actually support the transportation improvements. And this is something that we've done both in the Tysons area and also Reston, is to prepare a financing plan so that the improvements can actually be implemented over time. We're also looking at refining the grid of streets. While the plan that you'll see tonight has a conceptual grid, when we get down to actual development proposals and things like that, we'll be refining that. And then also we'll be looking at using existing revenues that we already have to start designing some of the improvements, particularly to the intersection at Route 7 and Route 50. And in addition to that, Supervisor Gross has expressed an interest for a subsequent follow-on motion to actually establish a policy committee that has elected representatives from both the city and the county to kind of oversee and provide direction for those follow-on motions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Morley-Nickfar. He's going to walk you through the details of the plan, and then we'll be happy to have a discussion, take questions, and go from there.
Okay, thank you, Tom. As Tom mentioned, I'm Chris Morley-Nickfar. I'm one of the transportation planners with Fairfax County DOT, and I have been one of the project managers for the Seven Corners study for the last 2 years. I recognize that some of you are just seeing all of this information for the first time tonight, so I've included a lot of information in this presentation. It may be more than some of you need, but I figured it's better to provide more information than less and leave you with some questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. The overview I'm going to provide tonight is an overview of the transportation study that was done in support of the work that the task force was doing, as well as a brief overview of the transportation section of the draft comprehensive plan for Seven Corners. So the Seven Corners Transportation Study was broken up into 2 phases. The first phase was designed to look at existing conditions, and the purpose of that was to identify what challenges we have today and also to identify what major trip paths are made today. Even with growth up to 2040, the major trip movements are likely to stay the same or similar. So we want to see which paths people are taking and how they're complicated and how we can improve those if we can. So phase 2, we used the findings from phase 1 to begin phase 2 and to develop a longer-term recommendation for the transportation network and Seven Corners. And both phases were conducted in collaboration with the Seven Corners Task Force and with the City of Falls Church planning staff. So this map shows the 2 different study areas that we included. What you see in green there, that matches up with what John pointed out a little bit earlier. That's the study area for what the Seven Corners Task Force is looking at. For transportation analysis, we, as you probably are familiar with, land use impacts have a broader impact on the transportation network than just the area where the land use decisions are made. So our transportation study area included all of the area there that's included within the red lines, and you see some of that falls within the City of Falls Church boundaries. So just some initial findings from phase 1 related to bicycle and pedestrian activity in the Seven Corners area. There was little to no pedestrian traffic observed when we did our analysis. There was some bicycle usage in the area, and as it's probably no surprise, the reasons are because there are high volumes of traffic at high speeds, and there's a serious lack of infrastructure to be used by those 2 modes. Phase 1 overall findings, we broke this down into 2 separate areas, the interchange area and the rest of the study area. What I'd like to point out is the second bullet under the interchange area is the highest volumes were observed during the weekday PM peak. That's probably not too surprising to most of us. We know that the PM rush hour is typically the worst in terms of traffic congestion, and that's what we use as a benchmark to measure our improvements at intersection levels of service and trip movements over time. Some other interesting things that we learned through the phase 1 analysis is that the vast majority of trips in Seven Corners during the PM peak are trips that begin and end outside of Seven Corners. So with the 2 major routes through Seven Corners being Route 7 and Route 50, they're both on the National Highway System, and they both are regional roadways that carry very high capacity. Most of the traffic is passing through on 7 or Route 50 during the PM peak weekday. And that was observed in the entire study area as well as the interchange area. So this graphic is just meant to give you an idea of how far the vehicles are backing up from the intersections during the weekday peak period. And you can see what you see as crossed out areas, those are the actual signalized intersections. And what we're having happen is vehicles may come to this intersection here and get backed up from this light, and it just spills over back here onto Wilson. So we end up getting queues that are almost back to Roosevelt Boulevard in the weekday PM peak. And we have the same situation happening here on Route 7 for vehicles heading eastbound at this intersection. They're backing up all the way to North Roosevelt Street. So phase 1 fed into phase 2, and the purpose of phase 2 was to assess the future land use scenario that was developed by the Seven Corners Task Force and identify multimodal transportation improvements to support that, and also to identify potential concepts for the Seven Corners interchange. We had some assumptions going into the study. For the analysis, as I'm sure you can imagine, this is a long-term study. Our horizon year was 2040, and we wanted to include not only potential links that we could implement, but considering we were right next to different jurisdictions, there are connections that the City of Falls Church or maybe Arlington County might put in by that time, the horizon year of 2040. So we wanted to make sure that we included those in our analysis because they do provide trips, and that those trips impact our network because it's all connected. But we wanted to make sure that we modeled those roads as they at their existing capacity, or how we think that the local jurisdiction responsible for those connections would want them to be modeled in terms of capacity. But we did this knowing that our final roadway connection would not include those links because we have no authority to implement them in the future. So future streets to consider in the analysis. The first thing is that John talked a little bit about the task force land use scenario that the Seven Corners Task Force came up with, but a part of that, along with the land use recommendations that they were also making recommendations for transportation improvements in the specific vicinity of their land use recommendations. So we had to include those in our transportation analysis, assume that they were going to be part of our network. As I mentioned, potential future roadways in adjacent jurisdictions, we wanted to include those. And then we had a transportation charrette where we asked the participants to come up with some additional connections that we could include in our analysis as well. So this graphic is intended to show the task force land use plan the task force came up with, but also to identify the transportation improvements that were a part of that. And you can see this light blue line here is what we call the Spine Road, and that is a bridge that connects Route 7 over Route 50 with no connections to Route 50 all the way to Wilson Boulevard. And that's sort of the road that holds or it ties the two redevelopment areas north and south of Route 50 together. You also see in the sort of purple color are these other link sort of street grids that the task force is recommending to support their land use plan. And then in the darker gray, you see some of the existing links that are there today. So to get an idea of what we might need to include in the City of Falls Church, we looked to the 2050 Falls Church Eastern Gateway Concept Plan. This was a study I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It was done for the Falls Church Economic Development Department, and it was presented to the Seven Corners Task Force by planning staff with the City of Falls Church back in spring of 2013. So this area it covers the Eden Center recommendations for redevelopment. This is Route 7 here. This is Wilson Boulevard there, and Roosevelt going north to the East Falls Church Station. And this concept lays out land uses, but also potential future grid network. Obviously, we didn't want to include all of these, but we included a connection that sort of mirrors this connection from Roosevelt Boulevard over to the Route 7 area, and then up in this direction to North Roosevelt. So we included those potential future links in all of the networks that we analyzed. And we modeled those at the capacity level, especially for North Roosevelt as it is today, which it kind of functions as a neighborhood street. It's just one lane in each direction. And we modeled this potential new connection behind. It actually runs on the rear of the Eden Center property. We modeled that also as a low capacity neighborhood type street with just one lane in each direction. We had a transportation design charrette, and that consisted of Fairfax County staff, the Seven Corners Task Force, Arlington County staff, our consultant team. And our consultant team included a roadway designer to gather input and come up with concepts based on input that was heard throughout the charrette process. The focus of that was identifying potential bicycle and pedestrian facilities along Route 50, expanding connectivity in the Seven Corners area, and also talking about potential concepts for the Seven Corners interchange. Some major goals of the future roadway network were to simplify the Seven Corners interchange. It's so many major roads coming into one point, and it's confusing for people that use it every day, and it's much more confusing for people that come here from out of town, have never been there before. We wanted to provide additional pedestrian and bicycle connections. We wanted to provide more local trips. One of the things that we've heard repeatedly throughout this process from people that live in the neighborhoods around Seven Corners is that they avoid going out of their houses at peak periods because they can only use Route 7 or Route 50 to get anywhere in the area, and they really would like additional connections so that they don't have to get on Route 7 or Route 50. So that was a major goal of our roadway network. And then lastly was multi-use trails on both sides of Route 50. Another thing that we needed to consider with our future roadway network is future transit connection to the East Falls Church Metro Station. Now, the edge of our study area is just under a mile from the East Falls Church Metro Station, and the Seven Corners Transit Center is just about a mile from the East Falls Church Metro Station, and there are no bus routes today that make that connection between the Transit Center and East Falls Church, even though they're so close. And even if there is, and I know that there is a plan to implement some service that way, there's not really an easy way for bus routes to make that connection today. So we wanted to provide a connection from Route 7, including the Seven Corners Transit Center, over Route 50 to Roosevelt Boulevard to give a direct connection to the East Falls Church Metro. And ongoing at the time of all of this work for the revitalization of Seven Corners, NVTC has been working on a Route 7 transit alternatives analysis that will eventually identify a mode and a route for a higher capacity transit service than just bus connecting from the city of Alexandria all the way to Tysons. They've already completed the first phase of their analysis, and it provides two alternate paths for the route. They suggested that it was important to have a connection to East Falls Church. So if you see the map here on the left, you can see that there's a route that goes all the way from City of Alexandria and just stays on 7, goes through the City of Falls Church on 7 and up into Tysons. And there's an alternate route that would deviate through Seven Corners, go up to the East Falls Church Metro Station, down Washington Boulevard, take a right on 7, and continue on through. So we wanted to support both of those options, because even if the route does deviate to the East Falls Church Metro, we know that having a good, strong transit connection on 7 all the way through City Falls Church is an important priority, not only for the city, but also for the region. So after taking all of that into account and the transportation charrette, our consultant put all that information together and came up with 6 concepts for us to consider and to provide further analysis on. And we developed this evaluation criteria to narrow those 6 concepts down to 3 concepts that we could provide or complete additional analysis on. So initially we had concepts 1 through 6, and based on this criteria, we narrowed those down to 3, and we labeled them concepts A, B, and C. This is network A that we analyzed, and it's called the split diamond with couplet. And so how this works, well, first of all, I'll point out that all of the segments on here that are highlighted in red are the major network components. All of the street grids that are highlighted in green are the lesser important lower capacity components. So you'll notice on here that North Roosevelt is a lower capacity street, as well as any potential road that runs behind Eden Center there. With that, this concept definitely has some pros and cons. It has a split couplet here along Route 7, and what that means is that it splits Route 7 in this little loop area into 2 one-way pairs. This would operate similar to how Wilson Boulevard and Clarendon Boulevard operate between the Courthouse neighborhood and the Clarendon neighborhood in Arlington County. If you wanted to access Route 50 from Route 7, the ramps would be off of the one-way pairs here. So if you wanted to go westbound on Route 50 from eastbound 7, you'd come down here, to this link, and you would take a right onto westbound 50. That way, traffic coming westbound on Route 50 that wanted to access 7 could get off of the ramp here and go this way. But you'll notice, so some of the pros of this concept is that it does have a direct connection here over to Roosevelt Boulevard and a connection to the Seven Corners Transit Center there. And it is a simplified intersection from what's there today, but it does have some definite drawbacks to it. You'll see that Wilson Boulevard has been cut off and cul-de-saced right there, and there's not a direct connection from Sleepy Hollow to Wilson Boulevard. It also doesn't provide support to redevelop some of these areas here with smaller block sizes. The one-way pair is a challenge for redevelopment in the center, and it also may be confusing for especially transit trips. If you get off on one side of the street, maybe going westbound in the morning, and you want to go eastbound, you'll have to actually walk a block or so to get the opposite direction traffic there. So that was concept A. Oh, and I'll also add that when we began this analysis, VDOT told us that because Route 7 and Route 50 are both national highway routes, that we may be required to have a direct connection from both of them. That's primarily the reason why we kept this concept in the loop. Then we'll move on to concept B. And concept B is probably the one that you've heard the most about. This is the ring road concept. It's also called two half diamonds. This is the ring road here, and I'll point out again that the major street components are in red, the minor ones are in green. It has ramp terminals to Route 50 on the ring roads on the west side and also on the east side of the interchange of Sleepy Hollow and Wilson Boulevard and Route 7, and you'll see that this makes the current interchange a regular four-way intersection, and it does a pretty good job of expanding a grid of streets in the Seven Corners area and breaking up these large super blocks into smaller block sizes, which would allow better, more urban, pedestrian-friendly development pattern in this area, kind of allow the character that we've seen in the City of Falls Church extend into the Seven Corners area. Now, some of the downsides of this concept is that it might have some more larger right-of-way impacts to some of the properties in the Seven Corners area, and it might be more expensive to implement than some of the other concepts that we're looking at. So concept C is called jug handles, and you'll see, I know it's hard to see from where you're sitting, but it breaks up the network into several access points between Route 7 and Route 50. There are single directional signals at different points along Route 50 that allow multiple accesses from Route 50 onto the network in Seven Corners area. So, for example, if you're heading westbound on Route 50 from, say, Arlington County, and you wanted to get into Seven Corners, you could stop at this signal here. You could take a right and come into the network this way, or you could pass all the way through and come to South Street and stop at this light and take a right into the network this way. The same thing going if you're going eastbound on Route 50. You can come in this direction, stop at this light, take a right and come into the network or proceed through, or you could come here to this light here. So some of the benefits of this concept are that it would be easier to implement in terms of right-of-way, to have less right-of-way impacts. It would probably take less time. It would cost less money to do, but it doesn't allow a direct connection to the Roosevelt Boulevard from Route 7, so we don't get that transit connection there. It also has 2 fewer crossings of Route 50, and that doesn't just limit vehicle movement, but it also significantly cuts down on additional pedestrian and bicycle connectivity as well. We took all 3 of those concepts and we overlaid the background growth, so that's the growth that would be expected to occur in the region by 2040, as well as the additional land uses that the task force was recommending. And we did a modeling analysis to see the average seconds of intersection delay across the network depending on which concept we were looking at. And we compared those, if you look up here, to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan scenario assumes the transportation improvements that are currently included in the comprehensive plan There's only one improvement, that is the widening of Route 50 to 6 lanes, and the amount of density that is allowed currently in the comprehensive plan. So essentially, if we just do what we have planned today and allow the existing comprehensive plan development, the average intersection wait time is going to increase from what it is today, 42.5 seconds. It's going to double to 98.3 seconds. So if we compare this 98.3 to our concepts, A, B, and C, with the task force land use and future background growth, all of the concepts perform better than not only the comprehensive plan, but they perform better than existing conditions today. So with this information, we can see the concepts B and C perform they're very, very similar. The difference is marginal, but they perform about 10 seconds better than concept A. And really the only reason that we included concept A is because we thought maybe we would have to have that direct connection between Route 7 and Route 50. But now that we know that we don't need that connection, we've discarded concept A. So just to another level of analysis to include concepts B and C, we looked at pedestrian walk sheds in the area. So what you're looking at here is the existing walk shed in the Seven Corners area. The darker orange is the distance that a pedestrian can walk within 5 minutes, and the lighter orange is within 10 minutes of the points that are shown here. And this point here on the right side, that is about the location of the Seven Corners interchange. So you can see that even with the pedestrian bridge that's there, a pedestrian really can't get that far within 5 minutes. They can get a little further within 10 minutes, but considering that that's the transit hub and that should be easy and accessible for a large variety of people that live close by, this is a really bad situation. So when we did pedestrian walk sheds between the two concepts, you can see a pretty a stark difference between concept B, which is up here, and look how far that 5-minute walk distance has expanded. This is the Seven Corners transit station here, and within a 5-minute walk, you can not only just get across Route 50, but you can get all the way up to the Roosevelt Boulevard, Wilson Boulevard intersection, and within 10 minutes, you can get all the way up to here. If we compare that to concept C, which is over here on the right, you really can't even get just to the opposite side of Route 50 from the Seven Corners Transit Center with that network. So in terms of pedestrian connectivity, concept B is far superior than concept C. So given that information, we reached out to the staff of our neighboring jurisdictions. We reached out to VDOT. We met with the county supervisors for both districts that include and border Seven Corners, and we had internal meetings with other Fairfax County staff to go over these concepts and decide on a final one for recommendation. And with all of that, we recommended concept B, the 2 half diamonds, and that's what you see up there. And the reasons are the increase in local connectivity. Local trips can avoid Route 7 and Route 50. There are more crossings of Route 50, including a crossing west of the interchange. For those of you who aren't familiar right now, if you don't cross at the interchange on foot, the next opportunity you have is 3/4 of a mile west at Cherry Street. So that's a huge distance for pedestrians to have to wait to cross. So it's better pedestrian connectivity. It allows us to do better bicycle connectivity. The network is easier to understand for people who are using it every day, as well as people who are just coming through every once in a while. There are fewer impacts to Route 50. We're able to put those major trails on both sides of Route 50. One of the downsides of Concept C was that it would put a lot of traffic on South Street, which I don't think anybody wants that. So Concept C prohibits that. And then it allows a direct transit connection from Route 7 to Roosevelt Boulevard and the East Falls Church Metro. So one thing I wanted to point out is that the maps have changed a little bit since some of the presentations that we gave earlier on, but the network hasn't. You'll notice that the network that I showed you earlier for this had this West Side Bridge connecting further west over here to Roosevelt Boulevard, but after some discussions with City Falls Church staff, we've decided to move that a little bit further east. It doesn't affect the network because we never had a lot of trips going up North Roosevelt anyway, but now we've moved that connection completely outside of the City of Falls Church, and it allows the network to work just fine that way. So moving on to the draft transportation section of the comprehensive plan, it is truly comprehensive in nature, and I have listed up here all of the different subsections that are within the transportation section. So it doesn't just cover roadway improvements, it covers roadway, it covers transit, pedestrians, bicycle, circulator service. One thing that I wanted to point up here is that we have a specific section about Leesburg Pike higher capacity transit service, because we want to make sure to call that out there. Throughout this process, we realized that there's a lot of overlap between transportation and urban design. Where does one begin and the other one end? So we actually did something different with this comprehensive plan, and we created this urban street network. And what we wanted to do is something a little different than what we've done in the past. Some of you may be familiar with the DRPT urban design multimodal standards that we can now use in Fairfax County, and they call out specific streetscape recommendations for specific roadway functional classes that address bicycle connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, transit, as well as vehicle access. So we applied those DRPT standards to the network in Seven Corners, and you'll see from this graphic that we have the multimodal through corridor, which is only on Route 50. We have the Transit Boulevard, which is all of Route 7 throughout Seven Corners, all the way to the Falls Church line there. And we have that as a Transit Boulevard on the bridge over Route 50 to Roosevelt Boulevard as well. Okay. I'm almost done. Okay, and then I just briefly up here, I included some of the cross sections that are they're consistent with the DRPT standards, and this is something that our Office of Community Revitalization put together for us to include for urban cross sections. So you'll see this is to give you an idea of what Arlington Boulevard, Route 50 might look like. I'll try to go through quickly. The Transit Boulevard, to give you an idea of what Route 7 might look like if it has dedicated transit on it. That's a concept there. The avenue and the major avenue, and this is really important because this is what we have the new Route 50 crossings, the bridges on the east and west side. Well, this one is actually just the west side of the new proposed interchange. So this is the one that would connect closest to North Roosevelt Street. And that's the local street cross section there. The Fairfax County Bicycle Master Plan, it really just uses the existing network. We were able to expand upon that and provide bicycle connectivity throughout the area, including cycle tracks on the Ring Road and on Route 7. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what a cycle track is, this is a graphic image of it up here. It's a dedicated bicycle way that's protected by landscaping from vehicle traffic. Summary of the transportation section, it recommends a vastly improved transportation network that increases connectivity for all modes. It simplifies the Seven Corners interchange and provides a base for redevelopment to occur in a more urban, pedestrian, and transit-friendly format with smaller block sizes. So with that, we can open it up to questions.
Mayor Tarter, that completes our presentation to you, our prepared presentation, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that informative presentation from all of you. And we thank you for coming out again tonight. As we mentioned earlier, maybe this is an appropriate time to have a dialogue, really just a back and forth between you and us about our questions, concerns, comments. Why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions, for example? Is there anyone on council who has any questions? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Supervisor Gross and all your staff for being here. It's great that you're here, and I wish we had the opportunity to meet with you earlier on this. And I think that now's the time to start the kind of sub-regional comprehensive planning that we really need to have. And we're very impressed, obviously, with your objectives that you're trying to achieve, and we share many of them. So, well, we had staff attending the meetings. I'm not sure at the policy level we really had the full participation that we really needed to have, and so our apologies for that. But my real effort is to look forward and not back, and you clearly have a forward-looking plan. I wonder if we could put up the one that shows the street grid. I think it's like 37 or one of the ones in there. Yeah. Vic Benton, our newspaper editor, is actually part of our street grid, so.
I'm gonna walk this way.
Right, thank you. The Fourth Estate Avenue is right there, actually. I think there are a couple points of sensitivity. The one is that we are really interested in working with the county on transit to serve around and through the city. And you know, many years ago, the decision was made not to have Metro in the middle of Falls Church, and frankly, we have an interest in being part of any major new transit lines that go through the area, provided that we can, you know, deal effectively with the residential parts of on Route 7. I think the real sensitivity is this area right here, because even though we appreciate now that the road won't be in the city of Falls Church, there's some concern, I think, lingering concern, that because the road system is more efficient, we'll actually be putting the same or more cars on Route 7 through the city. And I think what we're interested in is actually having fewer cars. And while we're all interested in doing what we can to smooth car transportation, the reality is that we think the long-term solution lies elsewhere. So that's an area that I hope we can work with you on, not only in terms of alignment, but what is it, how many cars will it serve, is it intended to serve, what will be the impact of our transit planning in terms of removing the volume of traffic that's cut through traffic, which I think is a similar interest that you have as well. So I think that's the area of greatest sensitivity, and certainly with regard to the automobile part of it. So I know we're very interested in working with you on that part. And again, working with you on the right transit configuration or configurations so that we reduce car traffic and at the same time have all the benefits that transit would bring to both your community and to ours. So I guess it's not so much a question, it's kind of, as I've looked at this, these are the areas of great sensitivity, and we appreciate that. I think what we talked about doing is that you need to move forward with this overall plan, but that the city and the county will be working together on not just implementing, but looking at the transportation plan to make sure that it works for both of us. So with that in mind, I think that's my interest in moving forward, and I just wanted to make those statements. And just, do you have any reaction to anything that I've said at this point?
I'm going to let Tom take most of the question, but you had mentioned Metro. And of course, you have East Falls Church, which I think is not really in Falls Church, is it? We don't have anything in Mason District of Metro. Remember that the Metro stop that was planned for Skyline was pulled off the plan by Metro. Just as Charles E. Smith was building Skyline to Metro densities, office, retail, and residential. And that's why I've worked so hard, as you know, Mr. Snyder, to get streetcar, Columbia Pike streetcar, to Skyline. We want to prove its viability. And then in 1999, Mr. Snyder and I talked about taking that through the city to Tyson's. We're not there yet. It's taken a long, long time. But I have always remembered that conversation we had years ago. And I think that plays right into what we are talking about here as we move into the future. But and the ring road, what we are calling the ring road, was adjusted quite a little bit after some conversations with the city staff. But I'm going to let Tom address the larger issues. He's my expert.
Mr. Snyder, you'll notice that the ring road is kind of in a dash configuration, and that's because the exact location isn't defined in the plan. It's more of a conceptual location, and so those are things that would need to be resolved in the actual location. And that's something that the follow-on motions that we talked about earlier would set up a process to be able to do that. And clearly, I think the high-quality transit on Route 7 is important to both of our jurisdictions, and that's something that we are eager to work with the city on with the NVTC study, and then ultimately to incorporate the final results in the plan. So I think that's very consistent with the views that you expressed.
Thank you very much.
Other comments, questions? I've got a question or two if no one else does. If you could, how do you envision when the ring road comes into 7? I mean, that's going to be an intersection, looks like it almost tees up. How would that work and how would that function? Would you have major backups with, a fair amount of traffic being diverted off of the main 7 spine onto that, having a T instead of a straight shot? In other words, typically a road, with full function would go straight through. It wouldn't stop and T. Is that going to impact its performance, and what kind of backups might you expect without a throughway for that street?
We do have a traffic analysis. We can share that with you in terms of the specifics. But in general, that west side of the ring road is really intended to allow traffic to access Route 50. And right now, it's very awkward to get from Route 7 to Route 50, particularly if you're coming westbound on 7 and want to go to westbound 50. So that ring road actually will take traffic off on the lower end and allow it to go around the west side and then make a left turn to access 50. So it actually pulls traffic off of 7. You probably also have some traffic coming eastbound on 7 that'll make a right turn to get down to Route 50 and then ultimately down to Sleepy Hollow. So it's not envisioned to be, like a boulevard or anything like that. It's probably a 2-lane road. I don't think it will result in any additional congestion. It should actually result in less congestion in the intersection because it's diffusing the traffic into a variety of different areas as opposed to it all focused on that one central point.
And you mentioned accessing Route 50. Is there an idea where, in other words, would it access eastbound and westbound 50 from both sides, or would it just be from one direction?
I have a pointer there. The west side of the ring road here would access to the west and from the west from Route 50. And then the east side is actually have a connection here. You can just see it in green there, from the east and to the east from the ring road.
Okay.
We would get rid of that bizarre approach by the Italian restaurant on the service drive. I don't think there's another place in Fairfax County or City of Falls Church or any place that has that kind of a zip around and then around a stop sign and so forth. It's really, really strange. And it's been that way for a long time, but it's not safe and it's not wise. So we would get rid of that at the very least.
And with this plan, do you envision, or does your traffic study show less traffic on farther down 7, or is it essentially the same amount of volume of traffic will be going down 7, will just be configured through this intersection in a different manner?
Chris, do you have that with you?
I don't have the answer to that specifically. I mean, I can look at that. But when you say the same amount of traffic, whether we do this with the task force land use, the traffic on 7 is going to increase because there's regional growth in the region. This network diffuses the traffic on 7. It provides more connectivity and different options. So sort of to address this question and also the previous question about the queuing, we do have a queuing analysis, and it compares the comprehensive plan scenario for queuing versus the queuing for this scenario, and it's drastically improved.
So I guess my question is really that right now, there's a fair amount of traffic that goes through this intersection that may want to go elsewhere. And so, for example, the Spine Road, I would imagine, would take some traffic that would otherwise be going down 7 and actually divert it before it gets to Falls Church. And so that was kind of where I was going with my question, was in fact, does your Spine Road, in fact, take some traffic off of 7 or further down 7 that might impact Falls Church because it splits off before it ever gets to Falls Church?
Yeah, that's a correct assumption. And if you compare the actual vehicle volumes to the levels of service at specific intersections, there are quite a few intersections that actually perform better. So they go from maybe a D to a C or a C to a B, but they're processing the same number of vehicles. They're just doing it much more efficiently.
Okay. And this same, I know Mr. Snyder, sounds like you might have a comment as well. Is this proposed, the ring road in green as it approaches Falls Church, to be at grade? I don't think we've had some discussion about this previously, or is this in any way to be elevated so they can drop down and kind of have a flyover ramp, or is this all anticipated to
In
be
this
at grade?
particular location, the grades kind of work in our favor, and you might be familiar that there's a very narrow bridge and of close proximity to this right now. So it would start on the south side, sort of at grade, and when it gets closer to 50, of course, it'll be above grade. It'll go over Route 50, and then it'll touch down probably somewhere in this vicinity here. And by the time it gets back to 7, it'll be at grade again. And then whatever happens to these properties on both sides of the road, they can redevelop and sort of plan their developments to work with the grade of that road there.
Okay. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Supervisor, and your staff, all of you, for coming out here tonight. If we can get you out here soon enough, you can all go have dinner, and it'll increase our meals tax takes considerably. No, seriously, thank you all for coming. I just wanted to focus on that slide that you put up about the connectivity between the western, edge of this area we're talking about and the East Falls Church Metro. The 2050 Eastern Gateway plan that the Virginia Tech Group did. I just want to put a plug in here for, council members from Falls Church in years and probably decades to come who will want, I think, to try to develop that portion of this area more intensively, certainly than it's developed now, and perhaps as intensively as any area in the city of Falls Church will be developed because of the proximity to the Silver Line. I mean, I think Roosevelt Boulevard to the Eden Center area is going to become, the street that's paved with gold as far as the city of Falls Church is concerned, because of the importance of the Silver Line connection out to Dulles and downtown. So whatever you and your successors do to facilitate that, and the slide that you showed seemed to indicate you're tying in what you're talking about with what is just, very early drawing boards stuff from us on that area. But I think that's very important to preserve and kind of to represent as more than, I think I saw the word village or something somewhere in there, and that's a code word that sounds a little lower density than I think that area is really going to become. I mean, that's going to be a very transit-oriented bike walk. I don't know how people will get down Roosevelt Boulevard, probably pneumatic tubes by then, who knows. But there'll be some way to get a lot of people from that area down Roosevelt to the Silver Line and then back to take advantage of all the other amenities that you're mapping out on the, your all side of the border there. And the only other thought, and Mr. Snyder knows this far better than I do, is that the folks, I think, in Falls Church just haven't the foggiest idea how in the world we're going to fit high-capacity public transit, hiccup, whatever the acronym is, on Route 7 as it enters the city. Because, you all know, you can start in Alexandria and go all the way out to Berryville, and it's almost unique in its, immediate residential feel and the narrowness of the street. And, we're just not widening that street anymore. That is and always will be Falls Church. So how we get high-capacity transit on that stretch and still accommodate the car traffic is a challenge that I know you all put your, best minds to. But one way to deal with it would be, again, to go up Roosevelt and, as your map showed, to cut over then to Washington Street and come down through that way with your public transit connection. So just, that's my 2 cents worth. And again, thank you all for coming tonight.
Mr. Baruch?
Thank you very much. Supervisor Gross, thank you, and Fairfax staff and the task force for being with us this evening. Really appreciate. Is that better? Thanks for being with us this evening. Really look forward to working with Fairfax County as a whole on this plan, and I just wanted to echo Councilmember Duncan's points that he reiterated, one of the things that I wouldn't say concerned about, but I think that we need to be making sure that we're working in lockstep on is that we do clearly have objectives to redevelop what's been termed as the Eastern Gateway, which includes the Eden Center, specifically around Wilson Boulevard and Arlington and that corridor. It's land use wise, it's essentially one major parcel that's pretty expansive and is at some point going to be ripe for redevelopment. And certainly I think the vision of the city right now is that at some point would be redeveloped. We're going to begin the planning process as we do each area plan moving forward, and I'm sure transportation is going to be a major piece of that. And one of the things that I'm hearing about is you're looking at land use, you're directly tying it with transportation in ways that probably should have happened by our predecessors but weren't, because that's just not how things were done then. It was done a little bit more ad hoc, shall we say. And I think to my point, ad hoc is not the way that I hope will carry through the planning efforts between our jurisdictions. And I really appreciate you kind of raising how many jurisdictions you touch upon. We're not so different. We happen to touch 2 different districts in Fairfax plus Arlington. So we're very similar that way in our planning efforts. And I would definitely encourage our staff as they're looking forward to bringing up the Eastern Gateway projects forward, especially as it relates to the impacts both on the transportation side and also on the land use side, that our 2 jurisdictions work very closely together. But to kind of wrap it up on that point, I do want to get a better sense of, as this plan is moving forward, sort of what are the effects on our visions for redevelopment, and how can we leverage this plan for what we're thinking about. And I think we're maybe a couple steps behind, or not. Again, we've been focusing in on other redevelopment areas as we've been going through in sort of a steady pace. But I think, given where this plan is at right now, that we may need to, on the city side, think about sort of the transportation issues as it may relate to the Eastern Gateway before we're too far along and this plan somehow impacts our plans on the Eastern Gateway in ways that we're not quite prepared for or don't realize yet. So I would definitely share the points that were raised earlier.
Mr. Brooks, thank you for your suggestions and your comments. And I'm really interested to know that the city is looking at those areas immediately adjacent to Wilson Boulevard for future redevelopment. One of the questions I get all the time is, what are you going to do with the Eden Center? I have to remind people the Eden Center isn't in Mason District or Fairfax County. It's fully within the City of Falls Church, and so. But it is a vibrant location, and it is important to this entire Seven Corners Williston area. If it weren't for this jurisdictional boundaries, we could just, envelop the whole thing. But knowing of your interest in looking at that particular edge of the city, I think this plan that we have been working on here, that the task force has been working on, and the transportation pieces could work very nicely together. Because I don't think there's anything in it that would say redevelopment there couldn't happen. I will defer to our task force chair and to Mr. Bishadny, but it seems to me that this is an ideal time to start knitting some of those ideas together.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think part of the coordination that we've done with the city staff all the way along is to make sure that the plans are complementary and not, divergent or something like that. So I think that's a very real possibility to do that development jointly in the future.
Ms. Conley?
Has anyone from Eden Center been involved in any of the task force work?
They were invited, but they have not participated.
What?
Participate in the visioning session?
Right.
That's right, they did.
Okay.
Right.
Was it
What-
the tenants or?
We had a couple of the young business owners that came to the. Thank you, Liz, for reminding me. I remember having some conversations with them. Sadly, they did not continue to attend, but they were active in the original visioning sessions.
But what we really did was we got this guy on the end here and got him in a car with a number of, because of the task force is only allowed to have 2 people together at one time. There would be 2 of us, Mr. Snyder, myself, somebody from the county planning staff, and I think how many tours did we make of the Eden Center and the tie-in? I mean, you might remember.
Well, we did 2 or 3, and part of it was trying to show how close, even though we have 3 different jurisdictions, Arlington, Falls Church, and Fairfax, how close physically these are, but how disconnected they are, and how they could be connected, and the importance of transit as one of the components to be able to handle additional development, because we'll never solve all these problems in cars only. So that, I think, was part of the discussion and discussions with Supervisor Gross in terms of the opportunities to link with the Route 7 line, which will also go through Bailey's Crossroads, which is part of this same revitalization area in the county and the city, and then also trying to take advantage of the East Falls Church Station in Arlington to our collective benefit.
The other problem we had was that the shopping center on the corner, we invited the owner to participate more than once, a number of times. The headquarters is in Rochester, New York, and they chose not to. We even said, here's your opportunity to think about 20 years from now. They just absolutely chose not to, and that's directly across from the Eden Center. So we looked for ways with Mr. Snyder of tying the whole concept together, but without that edge, it was kind of difficult.
One of the things I might also mention is that the Eastern Gateway study done by the Virginia Tech Group, there is a transportation chapter. It's very heavy on transportation options to single occupancy vehicles, the need for transportation, bicycles, pedestrians, and so I hope that was of some help to the task force in terms of the objectives there were to maximize those as that redevelopment occurs, and that was a 2050 plan looking further ahead, but that it can't be cars only, it's got to be multimodal.
So the representative of Eden Center is very active in the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce. And Alan Frank is his name? Has always has. Okay. So he is somebody that we can connect you with if you need to.
Well, we got a tour with Alan as well.
Okay.
So I've been with them. I've been through the shopping center, had lunch over there.
Yes. He's aware of what we've been doing. I was thinking in terms of the actual folks who are doing business there at the Eden Center, who were involved a little bit.
He paid for it, I didn't.
Ms. Oliver?
I just want to go back to the lead into the transportation study. You talked about your general plans for the area, and I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about the increase in density that you're expecting as a part of the redevelopment. You're talking about increasing residential, retail, and other commercial.
We went in with the assumption that, unlike many other areas in the county, and the one I'm most familiar with is the Reston Town Center. I was the county planning commissioner that did that project. Took 2 years and maybe 40 citizen meetings, and I had 12 speakers all in favor at the end of the process. But there was nothing there to begin with. Okay, so adding a couple of million square feet and 5,000 residential units wasn't that difficult because it was vacant space. This is completely different. You have operating businesses that are making money for the owner. You've got residential development that's low income, some of it subsidized by HUD and VHDA, some of it not, that's generating profit for the owner. How do you convince the individual with the residential projects to tear them down and build something new? Well, first of all, he's got to pay off the loans. He's sitting on vacant ground now for 2 years while he's doing that. And then he's got to convince VHDA and HUD to allow him to do that. And the only way they will allow him to do that, you have to replace the units with brand new units. All right, he's got units that are already paid off, and they're generating income, right? Now you're telling him to build new units that are going to have to be subsidized somehow for the next 20 or 30 years. How do you do that? Well, one way you do it is, and we had all the experts in over that 9 months talking to us about this, how you do the financing, how you make it work, and generally it's a 3-to-1 rule. You have to build 3 new units to replace that one with new ADA accessible brand new units, because those 3 new units are spinning off money that's going to subsidize that old unit for a number of years. And so that's how you do that kind of stuff. Now, what do you do in a situation with the Saul Center? We all know that Saul Center, right? It's the highest performing Home Depot in the eastern part of Northern Virginia. In fact, they have people coming from Washington, D.C. Well, they've got a 30-year lease. So, and that would be the same, would be true of many of the other stores. How do you convince somebody like Saul to take what I think, and I'm a city planner, by the way, I'm just like him and Lauren, been doing it for 40 years. How do you convince somebody to tear down something that is a performing asset and do something completely different? He's losing the value of the asset. He's having to pay the bank, right, for the loan in the meantime. He's already had to buy out the leases. So he's millions of dollars into this thing before the first thing happens. And why is he doing all that? Because we want him to tear it down, to put in grid streets, to put in residential so that people can go from upstairs, downstairs, and walk to the store, have a great street front like Shirlington or Reston Town Center, whatever. We're convincing them to do all that. How do you do that? Well, what we determined was one way to do it is let him have the retail he's got, but now let's put people there so that they can use the retail, and we don't have huge parking lots anymore. The idea is to create, quote, vibrant streets. So when we talk about increasing residential density, that's why. Because without that, nothing's going to happen. And the second reason is, and I'm on this soapbox all the time, trying to tell people, you can't redevelop and revitalize an area without people with disposable income. So if we've got people there making an average of $42,000 a year as a family living in a unit, they are paying their auto loan, they're paying their mortgage, they're taking care of their kids, they're probably both working, and they're barely getting by. Do you think they have the money to go to a nice restaurant? Probably not. So how do you create the nice restaurants? Well, you have to have disposable income. How do you create disposable income? You have to put new units there, and they've got to be nice units. You've got to attract people into those units. So what we end up with now is a situation that it's an absolute negative for the county, an absolute negative for Falls Church. It's a cancer on that east side of Falls Church. How do you turn it into something really positive? Well, our plan puts something on the order of $500 million of new income into that area when it's all built out. Now, that's going to take some time, but that's a huge, huge thing.
Well,
that's how we do it.
Let me add something about the Seven Corners Shopping Center site. Its current zoning in Fairfax County is C7. That is a regional retail center, not a neighborhood serving center. It's a regional retail center. You can have 90-foot high buildings under the current zoning. You can have, and the minimum size is 1 million square feet, so you've got lots of that. That's not what we want for the future. That's not what anybody wants. People want change. They want something different. They don't want 90-foot buildings in the middle of a C7. So we are looking at how to change that so that it is no longer the 1950s and 60s and 70s style, but to accommodate all the people we know that are going to be moving here, all the jobs that we know are going to be coming here. Now, we're not going to get them all in Seven Corners, but we know that we need to be prepared for that. I don't want Seven Corners Wilson to be left behind as folks are looking even farther west. We've got location, location, and location. That's a big selling point.
Now, I'll add one more point to that. Is early on in the process, and I mentioned this in my remarks, when we looked at how could we deal with transportation, what's that all about? we asked the staff to take all of the zoning for all of Seven Corners and use it at its highest possible FAR. Saul was $1 million. It's only at 600,000 today. So they could add 400,000 more square feet tomorrow, and we would have nothing to say about it. So we looked at that and generated trips from those numbers. And I'm pretty sure, I mean, the transportation staff can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that after we did all that and we came up with that number, we have not exceeded that number with the new development scenario we have. So what that means is pretty much sticking with the existing planning, existing zoning. The difference is we've reconfigured the site. We've turned it into a pedestrian-friendly, people-friendly place and a real destination people would want to use and go to. So.
I think my only point was just that as we in Falls Church think about what's happening around us in the city, we have a lot of anxiety about all the cut-through traffic and the pressures that come from having major developments on either side of us. And yet, you know, what you're making a very good point about is that it's coming, it's going to happen, and, you know, we can't just say we don't want the traffic because it's going to be there.
It's coming. It's going to happen. We want it to be walkable and bikeable and a lot more transit. That will take care of a lot of the issues that you raise about, you know, the additional traffic and the additional impacts on the city. If we can make it walkable and bikeable and get people out of those four-wheel vehicles that we talk about, Dave, it's going to benefit the city. It'll benefit everybody. It'll make the area different than it is today. It'll set it in place for what people want today, not what they wanted 40 or 50 years ago, but what they want today, and especially going into the future.
I think the other point I would make is that one of the reasons there is a lot of cut-through traffic, not only on your side but also on the county side, is that Route 7 isn't functioning correctly. And we believe that a number of the recommendations that we're making will improve the way that Route 7 functions, not just for cars, but as Supervisor Gross said, also for transit and bike and pedestrian. That should cut down substantially on the number of people that feel they have to go onto the local streets to get around it, because it's going to function better. And we're also putting in a grid of streets that will diffuse that traffic right in the immediate area.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Let me just follow up because I really like where we're going with the conversation. Let's go back to slide 37 again. There we go. Yeah. I think the real sensitivity here is that is our total transportation plan to focus on walkability, bikeability, transit, is the net effect of it to reduce car traffic, even assuming we're getting the growth, or is the net effect that you will be generating, we will collectively, and I'll use that term collectively, be generating more car traffic? And so the ring road becomes, in essence, a traffic generator. So I think that's the real question. That is, will the ring road simply move the existing, or hopefully fewer cars more efficiently, or does its presence in the overall context of the transportation plan actually lead to more traffic ending up on Route 7 in the city of Falls Church? I think that's the ultimate concern. And so the entire transportation plan is something we need to work with you on to make sure that it works for you, but also achieves our transit and our reduction of car traffic throughout the area, including down Route 7.
This plan that's being proposed actually results in fewer car trips than the current comprehensive plan that is already approved. As Mr. Tillman indicated, you know, Seven Corners Shopping Center could go in and increase the amount of density without any, you know, zoning approvals from the county right now. There's a lot of density in the current comprehensive plan that could go in essentially with the existing network. So this plan actually reduces the number of trips that the current comprehensive plan would allow.
How about compared to current volumes? This is the kind of thing, we don't need to get into that sort of detail, but that's the kind of thing we
We do
want to
have that
explore
data.
with you.
We do have it.
So that we, again, you achieve what you need to, but at the same time, we achieve, if at all possible, a net reduction in car traffic. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other?
I think that would be for another meeting, Mr. Snyder. Yeah.
We'll wrap this up shortly. Mr. Z?
Well, I think we've kind of gone all the way around here, and most of the things I wanted to say have already been articulated. I do want to thank all of you guys for giving up for every evening and beginning to engage all levels of our city in a discussion for what I thought was originally a very simple discussion, maybe a simple-minded discussion of where we'll put some new roadway on your side or our side of the boundary, and now it turns into a much larger discussion of revitalization of the area, which I think is a very large discussion. It takes me back to kind of my post-grad days at Columbia when we were discussing what hath Robert Moses wrought. So those of you that know what I'm talking about here, we need to understand this is a very, and it's no longer Robert Moses doing something, it's all of us doing something, and of course we have to do it together. I would say that this is a journey of many steps. I'm glad we've taken the first few. And of course, the streetcar is not part of this, and that must necessarily be part of that discussion at proper time. So any more would start to talk about David Snyder's sensitivities, and I don't want to do that. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Z. I think it probably is time to wrap this up, but I make a few comments myself. First, I'm pleased to hear of your willingness to work with the city to, as this plan evolves and to make it better. We are in favor of economic development, both here in the city and in your part of Fairfax County. We also want to preserve our existing neighborhoods, established neighborhoods as well. We want to make sure we get the traffic and the transit right. You know, some of these things, for example, Seven Corners, I don't know when it was built, but it looks like it was pretty doggone while ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago. 50, yeah, so it's been a while, but a lot of these things end up being there for a lot longer than people think. So we want to make sure that we get this right, and we appreciate you reaching out to us to have us work together to make sure that we do take the right steps. But we want to see a vibrant Seven Corners. I think that's in everyone's interest, including our own. And a rising tide lifts all ships. And so I think what's good for you in many ways is good for us as well. So we thank you again for coming out tonight. We appreciate you reaching out to us, and for you, particularly Penny, for showing up in person. That means a lot to us here. So we hope that we'll continue the cooperation and the good work between us going forward. So thanks again. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? But again, our thanks to you all for coming out. Take care. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started and keep this meeting on track. Mr. Shields, are you ready? Okay.
Council, on August 4th, the council took, I think, significant steps in working towards a consensus of a framework to going out to the public to get public input and comment on a framework for the investment of the water sale proceeds. And so we wanted to take tonight's discussion just to the next step in terms of process. I've laid out a draft process by which the council could take formal action on those and set the stage for public hearings and input on the options before us. Just to summarize very briefly, we've discussed two broad approaches, and the first is investing a portion of the sale proceeds in the pension fund in order to earn a perpetual return on the investment of principal. And the other major approach is investing directly in capital improvements for the benefit of all citizens. The principal invested in the first option is projected to provide a 7% annual return on average over the long term, with some years outperforming this benchmark and some years underperforming this benchmark. The principal invested in direct capital improvements will result in an 8.5% annual return in the form of avoided debt service for a period of 20 years, which is the typical bonding term that the city uses. Given the unfunded liability of the city pension fund is approximately $11 million, that is the amount that I recommended to the council earlier this year for investment in that return on investment of principal approach. And I do just want to note that that unfunded actuarial liability number is still at this point the best forecast that Chiron has provided for the city of what our unfunded liabilities will be as of July 1st, 2014. That number still could change, I think probably a little bit, based on their final analysis in the next 30 days. Very importantly also, it assumes, and this was covered when the retirement board was with you, that the discount rate, which was used by the actuaries, is reduced from 7.5% to 7%. A lower discount rate assumption results in a higher unfunded actuarial liability for the pension plan. 7% now is the industry standard and is the appropriate discount rate to use going forward in the opinion of the retirement board, and I concur with that recommendation. And so that's shown in the prior handouts that are attached to the discussion about the process going forward. But taken together, the water proceeds invested in these two ways, if the council's decision were $11 million invested in the retirement fund and $9.5 million invested in direct capital projects, together that would result in a combined annual fiscal impact of reducing approximately $1.6 million of costs per year, and those are laid out in the slides that were discussed on August 4th. Other options discussed by the council on August 4th was an approach where 100% of the proceeds ultimately would be invested in capital projects, and they would be held in an endowment fund until they were invested, geared to produce the highest yield that we could do, invested in the typical things that cities are allowed to invest in. Under that approach, this would provide an approximately 8.5% annual return for a period of 20 years in the form of reduced debt service costs, and then after 20 years, the sale proceeds would cease to have a direct budgetary impact on the city. And that's shown on slide 6 of the PowerPoint that was discussed on August 4th. Also discussed on August 4th was an option where we simply divided up into thirds, 1/3 of the sale proceeds into the pension fund, 1/3 for long-term capital, and then 1/3 for more immediate pay-as-you-go capital improvements. Those are laid out in the slide of how that would work in terms of the direct budgetary impact, and it's the perpetual return of $7 million in the pension fund would average over the long term $490 a year per year, and then the 20-year return of 8.5% in the form of avoided debt service would apply to the remainder. In any of these options, there was a general consensus on August 4th that we would work together to apply that portion of the sale proceeds slated for direct investment in capital infrastructure, whether it's facilities, whether it's stormwater, whether it's economic development proposals, that we would do that with community input through the CIP development process this year with adoption this coming spring. And that would allow for these investment decisions to be made in a deliberate fashion in the context of all the city's needs. To move forward then, in the form of an allocation decision initially, the way that action would be taken would be in the form of a budget amendment for an amendment to the FY15 budget, and that would set forth what funds would go for which purposes in that broad framework. And that's what you would, under this proposal, be getting initial feedback on. And then we would go through a longer process of CIP development to lay out for that part, which is for direct investment, how that would be done over the 5-year CIP or perhaps even longer time horizon to take advantage of these funds to achieve the maximum effect over the long term. So that's a summary, I think, of where we are right now. If we were to follow that path, the budget amendment would be prepared for the council. First reading would be at your meeting in October 14th. And that date would be to allow us to advertise it appropriately and sufficiently before that date. And then second reading could be as quickly as October 27th, also with a public hearing that night. And then between November and March, we would develop the 5-year capital improvements program and build the sale proceeds into that program. Those would be presented to the council on March 9th of 2015 with the council adoption on April 27th. So I'd like to get some feedback on this procedural approach and consensus on how we would present that to the public, simply in terms of the large allocations in that framework. And if we can arrive at consensus on that, then we'd proceed with the advertisements, et cetera, and a public presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Before I turn it over to the other council members, could you also elaborate on the legal opinion that was sought out? I know Vice Mayor Snyder had requested that. I know it's been sent to members of council, but could you summarize what you learned and your degree of confidence in what you've obtained?
Well, we've been discussing this approach with outside legal counsel now for over a year, and outside legal counsel has analyzed it from several different perspectives. But the bottom line is that, one, it is really important for the public to understand that there is a state mandate that local governments must provide a benefit similar to the VRS benefit, or if we're not in VRS, to provide our own independent plan that provides benefit that's at least 2/3 the value for employees as the VRS plan. That's a state mandate. Within state law, then, there's the expectation that local governments will fund that pension plan based on actuarial standards. We looked with outside legal counsel, is there any Dillon Rule prohibition to fully funding your pension plan in order to reduce your actuarially required contribution? And of course, there is no prohibition of that, and indeed there would be a mandate that be done. And the state's involvement really would only come in to the extent that if the city were somehow close to bankruptcy or default on those pension obligations, then there conceivably could be a state role. The question also was addressed in terms of reversion. What happens if state law changes from 20 years from now, and the state law says you don't have to have a pension plan similar to VRS in the future? You could have a 401k or a 401k equivalent plan. And the city then ultimately would decide to take that approach. The state involvement then would simply be that you need to meet your obligations, and then once that is done, any leftover residual value in the pension plan stays with the employer. And in the reversion statement that our outside legal counsel provided for the council, and which is in your packet, it lays out how that would happen, and it lays out what the intent of this investment is, how it would be administered, and then what would happen if in some future time the plan were to be terminated. And so those questions are addressed as well.
Okay, why don't we bifurcate the discussion to the two elements of this? One is the substance of it, whether there is a consensus, in fact, on how to proceed with these funds, the use of these funds, and secondly, how might we do it procedurally? In other words, what would be a schedule? How does the public get involved for comment, et cetera? But why don't we start with the first portion of this, which is just the substance of what Mr. Shields has recommended. Is there any discussion or questions? I know we've had previous discussions about this, but I think it's time to wrap up this discussion and hopefully form a consensus. If it's not unanimous, at least 4 of us in agreement. Any thoughts on what's been proposed? Vice Mayor Snyder? Mr. Baruch?
I'm happy to go first. So my thinking is, as it has been, my thinking as it has been, is that the manager's proposal makes sense. The one piece that I would question is getting a better sense of what we would do with the infrastructure maintenance and the million. But given that that's going to be part of the budget discussions, it's one that I would reluctantly go with. Just think that needs further refinement and discussion, and it sounds like that would happen under the current plan, that there would be CIP, et cetera, discussion about how to utilize those monies, because we may find out that it may make sense that it actually may throw off more if it goes into an endowment, which has some long-term benefits. But either way, I'm good with it. More or less, it could be million plus, million less. But I think I sort of land where the manager's proposal was. And then, we'll have the public engagement discussion. That again would just be what our preference would be, not where we ultimately land, but at least indicating to the public where we're at.
Vice Mayor Snyder, did you want to speak next?
Sure. First of all, I want to reemphasize what Wyatt said a minute ago. I had some legal issues that I've raised, and I think in large measure they've been answered. I do want a complete and total and free and open community discussion, and so I think I'm comfortable now, based upon the legal opinions, that the manager's proposal could be one of the ones that we put before the public, because if there were major legal issues, then I don't think we should waste people's time, but it seems to me that those have been largely cleared away. But I do think several other options ought to be, if not the preferred options, at least presented, so that people have something to compare and contrast and give them something to form the debate over. Because if they're just presented with one, because this is so large, because everybody has contributed into this fund, I don't have any problem with the manager's proposal being one, but I think we really ought to present at least one other, maybe two others, just for contrast purposes, just to say, all right, this is out there, this is another potential way you could do it. Here are the pluses and minuses, mostly minuses compared to the manager's plan. So anyway, that would be my thought.
Okay, Mr. Brewer.
If I may, thank you, Vice Mayor Snyder. That's sort of how I was envisioning it, that there would be sort of like, this is the sense of council yet again for the second go around, but present multiple options again for community discussion. That's what I meant by, I'm leaning that way. That's sort of what I want to signal to the community, is where I'm leaning or where the council's leaning, similar to what we did before in the previous council with whatever the document was that we voted on, but reaffirming that or something like that, and then really having a full court discussion with the community about it.
Other
Question?
Sure.
Vice Mayor Snyder, could you give an example of what you're thinking one of these other proposals might be?
Sure. One would be total investment in infrastructure. In other words, you use the money to build the school or to something else or to contribute to that. Because that's going to be on people's minds. They're going to say, well, you do get value because you're not going to the market to bond X amount. So that will give you something. And then I would envision something along the lines of a third approach, where you have the same fundamental components, but you move more of the money into non-pension area. Maybe that, I think the two ought to be the greatest. I think it ought to be the manager's proposal, and then I think the thing that contrasts most dramatically with the manager's proposal would be, let's put 100% of it into an infrastructure fund, as opposed to putting any of it in the pension. And then I think you have some sort of intermediate proposal. That would be my thinking anyway, but will be wide open for what the council wants.
I guess the reason I was asking is because I know that for a lot of people, the word infrastructure is intuitive and confusing. And that offers a very broad range of possibilities. And so some people would come up and say, yes, let's put it in infrastructure and it's got to be for the schools. And other people would come up and say it's infrastructure and it's got to be for stormwater or the library or whatever. And then what we would have would not be one voice, because the priorities for infrastructure investments would be very diverse. And there's a danger, of course, if we specify a particular infrastructure investment. But I also think we would have to be very careful about how we describe that second proposal so that the community understood what the choices really were.
Of course, Mary Beth.
You may have noticed by now that I've been kind of skeptical of the manager's proposal, but I've been doing a bit of studying and talking to people, and I have a thought here, and that based upon my own skepticism. I think maybe what we need to say is we have a lot of money, and this is all municipal money, and we've got a lot of needs in the city, and we have this pension obligation that we have to pay, and I think that's really important that I didn't understand at first, is that is something that is going to be with us for forever, and we can take care of it now or we can take care of it later. And it would almost be like paying off your mortgage early if you got an inheritance, or holding on to it and paying it off a little bit at a time. So I think that is an important thing to explain to people, because what I'm hearing a lot in the public is that putting it into the pension to some people means that we're just going to take care of the people who have pensions. And they're not seeing that there's actually a triple benefit to it, which would be we're putting it in the pension fund, and that covers the city obligation, and it covers the employees. It also provides us with that spin-off ROI that would cover an infrastructure project, and it also helps our credit rating. And I think that would be a trip. So if we can say, these are the demands on the city. So rather than say, here's an option, here's an option, here's an option, if we say these are the demands that are upon us, funding Mount Daniel, paying for, if the bond referendum passes, how do we pay for that? How do we pay for the pension? And then being able to say, this is one solution that actually covers 3 or 4 of our big needs. So.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Yeah, I like the way that Ms. Connolly phrased that. My question, I guess, to everybody is, can we convey the manager's option as the equivalent of a infrastructure investment vehicle, just very explicitly, right? We're going to save approximately 2 in some sense on the tax rate if we use the manager's option, right? And if we connected that sum very directly to the debt service on, pick your building. If we had the city hall ready to go, it could be that. If we had the library ready to go, it appears that the most shovel-ready project is Mount Daniel. But if we can go into the community and explain just in very direct terms, this building would cost you X number of cents, and we are now going to earn you that or close to that amount of money using this pension investment vehicle option, then I think it gets over what Ms. Connolly, and I'm sure everybody else has heard too, which is a kind of odd reluctance to embrace this idea for a well-educated, affluent community. It's surprisingly difficult to make the case that I think we all try to follow, which is put your money in the market and try to get your maximum return, and that's where you go until you retire. Well, the city is never going to retire. It's always going to be here. So we do want perpetual to be our investment time horizon, right? But maybe the connection, if it's more direct, would help people embrace this option, because it does sound like you are locking up the money in the pension fund. Well, that's okay if you get the quadruple whammy that Mary Beth indicates. Can we, so if we put an 11 million in and we get how much back per year, can we equate that to the debt service on Mount Daniel, if we bonded Mount Daniel for 20 years and 30 years and show that number to the community? I mean, is that something that people would be willing to do as part of the public information campaign?
I mean, Mary Beth, and it was really helpful to hear your thoughts about it. So as you were talking, I was sort of diagramming sort of how I landed to this position. And it sort of looks like a little triangle. In the center is the CIP, because I think that's sort of where the bullseye is. I think that's, if we're trying to solve for one problem as we move forward, and I would have actually flipped these two presentations between the water sale and where we're headed. As part of the Budget and Finance Committee, I think members met with Richard earlier this week, and I was trying to push Richard into bringing the slides forward and kind of presenting the problem before we say, here are the backup slides, but that's for the next discussion. But the way that I'm viewing kind of our financial and fiscal situation is the CIP is where we've got our greatest challenges. I think the operating we're going to be able to manage one way or the other. We seem to do that every year, but the CIP is really the bigger nut. So I'd put that really as what are we trying to really get at? Where are we trying to really move the city forward to? And that's really the CIP, and that certainly includes things like the library, city hall, schools certainly, et cetera, and the list goes on. And the three legs of trying to really deal with that, and I'll channel various members of the city council. I'll channel Phil Duncan on economic development. I'll channel myself and others on operating budget diets, and we'll get to that, I think, in the next discussion. And then the third is the water piece, which we're, I think, all trying to explain. And I think the best way to explain that is, this really does get the ROI and the rate of return, which we're meeting our obligations that we have to our employees under Virginia code, but we are pre-funding it similar to what we would be doing with a mortgage, but yet utilizing the money that frees up to do things like handle the CIP. So I would try to, in the lessons learned, I've, think visually kind of explaining it in that type of just one slide, if that's where we end up, and all the proposals can sort of be shown utilizing this would be one option of just kind of graphically explaining it, and we can plug in the numbers. But I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit and probably we're rambling given that it's 10 o'clock at night and I haven't eaten yet. That's sort of an approach budgetary wise that, no, I think I'm already pretty hyped up between Diet Coke. The Mountain Dew was missing. I would have left a note on the machine saying, Mr. Mountain Dew, man, we need more Mountain Dew. But anyways, I digress. But that's sort of how I'm envisioning the budget process as we move forward is CIP being the center, and then those three items, again, water, utilization through the manager's proposal, operating budget diet, and then economic development are the way that we handle our biggest challenge, and that's the CIP moving forward.
Okay, so I'd say it's getting a little bit late. We do have some more presentation on the budget that we're going to hear shortly. Why don't we try to wrap up this discussion? What I'm hearing, it sounds like, Karen wants to say something else. I'm not hearing that, but I'm sensing that. And if you want, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and quickly say what you got to say, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sorry. This is just it comes down to the way you interpret things and appearances. And one of the concerns I have about putting it just purely in money to be allocated during the CIP process is that the CIP process for many years has been, okay, we know we need to make some infrastructure investments and we're going to stretch out how long, can we postpone this, and we'll do what we need to do, and we'll try to do the planning so that we don't have anything really break on us. We have an opportunity right now with some extra money, and it is a time to maybe shift the way that we look at this and say, what should we maybe bring forward? What if we did it now rather than when our Band-Aid approach says we would get to it might make a difference? And so if we put this into the CIP process, the other portion of it, I want to make sure that we do that with the consensus that we will be looking at the CIP a little bit differently, not just what we've been planning for years and years, but what's the extra opportunity we might have right now? Where could we get some additional bang for our buck? And that's my only concern about the optics of how it looks if we say we're going to just put it into the CIP process. I want to make sure that we're also thinking creatively about how we might use money that we didn't have planned previously for that might make a difference.
I think that's an excellent point, and I guess let me finish my little thought, and then I'll go to you, Dan, and then we'll wrap up. I think it's an excellent point. To me, a critical element of this money is this kind of immediate, bang for your buck, particularly in the downtown area. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really spruce things up, create some highly visible improvements that will benefit our commercial areas that are visible, that improve functionality, sidewalks, just make the downtown particularly look better. So I think that is an important element of this, and I would be in favor of what you just described. Dan, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. I favor the so-called option 3, not so much because it puts a third in the 3 different buckets of pension, capital improvements, and immediate investment, but because I think it allows us to be diverse in our portfolio. Quite frankly, I think that we're going to be on the hook for pension, whether it does okay, 7.5% is okay. Never going to do spectacular, and if tanks, it all goes away, we're still going to be on the hook for it. That way, we only lose a third of the 20 million, and not all of it, or half of it. And we get to actually have people thank us for making the right decision on spending it on things that benefit the city, no matter what it is that we finally end up on. I think the most important thing is we have this option 3 available, then we're able to have a useful public discussion on how we should spend that would color our thinking and provide us with hopefully the right answer at the end of this process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Z. I think, Mr. Shields, it sounds like we have a consensus on how to go forward. In other words, presenting multiple options. I think there is some, people are leaning towards one of those options, but it's, of course, subject to public comment and input from the community. Are people okay with what Mr. Shields has suggested as a way forward in terms of, hearing schedule mid-October, I think, for the first reading? Is there any comment on that, or should we just go ahead and go forward with what we've just heard?
I think the second...
Sure. Go ahead. Well, Ms. Conley and then Mr. Duncan.
I think 2 weeks is a little bit of a short time. I think people may miss that. From the 14th to the 27th, just to have a public hearing, first vote, second vote. I would be happier if that was November, the second Monday of November, to give a little more time for people to digest and think about it.
Okay. Mr. Duncan?
Just looking at because we do not meet on September 29th, and there's a fair amount of distance between September 15th and October 14th, right? So what is going to occur between tonight and October 14th in terms of community information and dialogue?
There are 2 reasons why that date was chosen. One, we were envisioning this budget amendment being part of other budget amendments we need to do just as a matter of course at this time of the year, and that would be ready for action for first reading on the 14th. The second reason was in order to advertise it in the newspaper, you would want to do that with enough time in advance of the 14th and we'd use other ways of getting the word out as well, but to try to make sure that people were well informed about it. That's the reason why we didn't shoot for the September 22nd, just as an example, to start the discussion off with a public hearing then.
I guess, I hear what you're saying. I guess my concern is that given all the other things that are going on, it's just going to kind of recede from view, I'm afraid, if we don't do something on the 22nd. I don't know what something is, but I think it's very important that we keep this, in front of people, and again, I'll say it, connect it as directly as we can to something that is tangible that they, are also thinking about. I'm taking my cues from Mr. LeCondre here. I hope he doesn't mind me invoking his name, is that if we're going to make a perpetual investment, we need to show something fairly perpetual that we're buying with it. And so if we were talking about the cost of of Mount Daniel for the next 6 weeks, which is what we are going to be talking about as a community, I would at least by the 22nd like to see some numbers that put meat on those bones and give an example. Or you can pick City Hall or the library too, I don't care what, but some tangible infrastructure benefit that the community will realize is a long-term investment.
All right, so why don't we see if there's a consensus? Do people want this on the 22nd? Or is it all right in the 14th of October? Maybe we just really quickly do that and try to wrap
If we
this
do it
up.
on the 22nd, we could do it as just a good, clean presentation on this issue, and it wouldn't be sort of tangled up with the rest of the formal actions on a budget amendment. But we get the information out as an introduction to the public and advertise it as best we can between now and next Monday to
All right.
make sure, so people know what's going to be talked about and they can come and speak about it.
All right, that's fine. Let's go ahead and do that, and let's finish up that item and move on to the next, unless there's anything urgent.
I just have one comment. I just think that if we can squeeze in maybe a weekend town hall meeting on this, it would be helpful. I think those have relatively gone well. I think
Okay.
this deserves something of that nature.
Okay.
And it may be more than one, I don't know. And if we can incorporate my slide, which I've drawn out, I appreciate it as part of that.
All right.
Three-corner hat?
All
Three-corner
right,
hat.
all right, let's go ahead and
Part of
move
that.
on then. I think we've got a,
Three-legged stool?
I think you've got the consensus. Let's go on to the next item and keep this show rolling.
If I could just make a couple introductory remarks. This is going to be Richard LeCondre's show, but the purpose of tonight's year-end financial report is to provide a snapshot of the city's financial condition as of June 30th, 2014. And then from that information, we'll provide, we'll discuss where that puts us for FY15, the current fiscal year, and for the coming 5 years. The forecasts that we'll show tonight are purely for illustrative purposes. We're not in FY16 budget development mode yet. That will come soon enough. But the goal is to help illustrate debt service costs and our trends on operating costs and the role that economic development can help us meet those costs. And then from that discussion, then we will, over the coming months, begin FY16 budget development. A couple of key points I would note at the outset. Revenues for FY14 came in $1.9 million above the original budget forecast. That's 2.5%. Last spring, this was anticipated and deployed in the FY15 adopted budget to pay for pay-as-you-go capital, as well as to reduce the required tax rate for operating budgets. In addition, our managers spent 1.5% less than budgeted overall, adding $1.1 million to the net surplus for FY14. Those unspent funds will allow the city to meet pay-as-you-go capital needs in FY16 as well. With the assignment of fund balance to capital reserves, the unassigned fund balance at FY14 drops below where it was in FY13. This was discussed a lot during budget adoption and in the budget amendment that the council adopted over the summer months. So we will remain slightly above the 17% target, but our fund balance will be lower at FY14 than it was in FY13. The last point that I would make is that capital reserves that the council has created, we have those now for the first time as a fund. And those capital reserves will be available for pay-as-you-go in FY16 if the council uses them for that purpose. And one of the points we'll make at the end is that for the longer term, a sustainable revenue source is needed for pay-as-you-go capital, including the local match for NVTA transportation needs. But that's for future consideration. So I want to thank Richard and the finance staff for the work in distilling all the FY14 results down to this presentation, and for the Budget and Finance Committee for their work and helping us identify key points for communication and information that are most useful for the council and the community as we go forward. Richard.
Happy Monday, Council. You want to get up and run around a little bit so you stay awake? This will be about a half hour. We're going to talk about the year-end report. This will be about 15 minutes. That sound better? All right.
Please.
This will be very quick. It'll be very quick. What I've done is we've given you the pro forma statement. I am not going to touch on that because the slide presentation will highlight some of the salient points. But again, I'm always here to answer questions. Okay, moving right along. All right, year-end finance report. We're going to talk about where we are now, our revenues and expenditures, our fund balance, our revenue projections in terms of where we're going, capital planning items, and then we are going to leave you with some takeaways. Okay, so what we did in coming up with our trends is we looked at our results of operations going back to 2006. This graph will indicate those periods where we had deficits and we utilized fund balance. You'll see that in years 2008 through 2010. 11 through 14, you'll see that we were generating surpluses, particularly in years 11, 12, and 13. We built in surpluses as we tried to restore our fund balance. Okay, here's our results of operations. Again, this is a snapshot in time. It's as of June 30th. And what we're doing is we're looking at our budgeted expenditures, budgeted revenues to our actuals. All right, your ending fund balance was $21,098,050. When the auditors present their report, the number for your ending total fund balance will be almost double. And again, remember, this is a snapshot as of June 30th. That will include the proceeds from the sale of the water system. We will take subsequent action that will reduce that total fund balance number, but that is not what you'll see in the financial statements. So I'm warning you now that the number is going to be closer to 42 million.
You like that number?
Okay, general fund balance. I gave you the total number, the 21 million. This is how it's broken down. Your blue represents your unassigned fund balance, which as, sir?
Sorry, before you move on, since we quickly moved through 14, or I'm sorry, slide 4. Richard, am I correct that we are still off from our billing cycle in our fiscal year? That's still generating
Our
surplus?
assessed value is still out of kilter. This was the final year that you will see that assessed value difference going forward. Whatever the assessed value is, whatever tax it generates will be the number. It won't vary that much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I did forget that your surplus was $3.8 million. We will go over how we got to that. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, what is the standard variation on a surplus to say 2.5% is
We'll get
on
to that.
target? We'll get to that too? Okay.
Okay, let's go back to our general fund balance. Our unassigned is $13,315,000. We have encumbrances and carry forwards. That's the darker blue and the striped numbers. The committed, that is council action that move money from unassigned to assigned. That's what established your capital reserve. That's also what funded the 2015 budget. That's $2.9 million.
That's for operating.
No, it was a combination of capital and operating. Your committed capital is your purple. And again, what we did back in March or April is we took the fund balance and reduced it to 17%. that had a lot to do with that open space discussion, if you recall. We resolved it. We moved all the money into the capital reserve by legislative action. We also looked at the difference in our unassigned fund balance, and we moved everything in excess of 17% into assigned capital. All right, that is a manager decision that will be ratified by council when we do the next budget amendment. The committed for development is we did a budget amendment that moved excess developmental services charges into a fund so that we could pay for inspections over the next 3 years. You get the charges you get the development fees when a developer comes in and gets his permits, but there are numerous inspections that can run up to 2-3 years. All right, your assigned for development is we took the excess revenue from 15 for developmental services charges, and we also moved that into that fund. Again, that will be ratified by legislative action. Next budget amendment. Okay, here's a graphic of your unassigned fund balance. Going back to 2006, you'll see where you hit all-time lows in 2009 and 10. You were even below the 12%. Now, this also takes into account that we did make a policy change in 2012 where we established a new floor of 12% of expenditures and a ceiling of 17% of expenditures. Before that, you used revenue. The shaded blue is only our forecast to solid or what we've actually done since 2006. For those of you that like the graphs, here's a graph. Thank you very much, Councilmember Oliver. We've gotten quite a lot of exercise in creating charts and graphs. All right, this is the results of operations, and you see what the swing is. You've had 5%, you've had over 10%, and again, a lot of these were built-in surpluses. Now, as Councilmember Connolly mentioned, we came in 1.9 million above in revenues, which is about 2.5% above what we budgeted. Generally, you operate within the 2.5% to 5% range in terms of your variance. In municipalities that have budget departments where they have half a dozen analysts, they can be even more refined because that's all they do. Our office is not equipped to do that. I'm open to expansion.
But we solved that problem with fixing the calendar year, right? So next year.
Not necessarily.
You're gonna have.
There will always be fluctuations in your local taxes. There will always be fluctuations in your expenditures. It doesn't mean that.
But it should be less than 2.5 moving forward, we anticipate.
The majority of the variance this year is because of real estate, but
Right.
also this year we have the sale of land, and that's in there as well, and that was a big chunk of that variance this year as well.
And it looks like he's looking for that Mountain Dew, but the 2.5% is good, and it's come down, and we have every reason to expect that it will be that or less than that because the major fluctuator in the past was real estate. But there's still going to be some fluctuation in B-Pole and all the other areas. And
We will have charts and graphs as we move further along in the budget process that will show you how we have narrowed that gap over the last 4 years.
All right, let's keep going. It's
Yes,
getting
sir.
late.
Let's keep going. All right. Our key indicators and something for Mr. Z to ponder. We use these 6 local taxes as our barometers as to where we're going. We just talked about the real property tax, where we've eliminated that difference in timing. We do have personal property taxes. That's our first key indicator. The billing went out in September. All right, so that's our first key indicator. The last one is BPOL. All right, now what this shows you is we had actual revenues of in excess of what we budgeted in 14. In 15, we increased our budget so that we could eliminate some of that. We are now looking at a point where we may have gone a little bit too far. Okay, but we will continue to monitor those items. We don't expect sales tax to grow at 8.1%, nor do we expect other taxes to grow at 8.6%. All right, overall, the local taxes are 4%, which is in line with our trends.
The bottom line on that slide is we will watch it closely. We think we'll hit our FY15 numbers. We don't think we'll exceed them.
Okay, base revenue assumptions. At the Budget and Finance Committee, we did some projections back in July, and we looked at everything we've done year over year from 2006 through 2014, and then we came up with averages. We came up with a 7-year average, a 5-year average, and a 3-year average. We picked for our assumptions that average that produced the smallest gap in our projections. And so what we did is we used the 3-year average that produced the best or the smallest gap in the projections. But all of our assumptions for this exercise and for this presentation are data-driven. We did the same thing for operating expenditures. As you see, general government in a 3-year average is 5.1% growth. The school transfer for your 3-year average is 6.7%. That's what went into our projections. Here's a bar graph that outlines what we've done since 2008.
Can I just ask one quick question? So the current budget year's general government operating percentage increase was 3%, 2.8%, something like that?
For FY15?
Yes, it was around 3%.
Around 3%,
Yes.
and the school's increase ended up being around
9.1, 9.2. Yeah.
9.1. Okay, so we had about 3 and about 9.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so what we did is we took our data-driven assumptions and put into this chart. Now, it's important to note that the general government and the schools were based on the trends. The debt service came right out of the CIP. All right, there are some things that you can't just melt down to assumptions. We have a CIP, we've incurred debt, and those debt service costs remain with us no matter what we do. All right, let me go back a minute. The revenue to expenditure projections that are shown here do not include the CIP. So your deficits run anywhere from 2.1 million in 16 to 4.6 million in FY20.
Not including pay-as-you-go.
Not including
It does include
pay-as-you-go.
debt service.
It only includes general government, the schools, debt service. Now, next slide only looks at your capital and your pay-as-you-go. We start out with a $2.5 million capital reserve after we've utilized close to 1.8 million of your capital reserve to fund the 15 budget. In 16, assuming that you cash fund your transportation, you reduce your capital reserve by another $1.4 million. That leaves you at 1.1. In 17, again, the same assumption, you will exhaust your capital reserve and you will then have a deficit. And that deficit will carry you through to 2020. Here's where we combine the deficits from your operating and from your pay-go. So you see you run anywhere from 2.1 to 6 million. Graphically, that's what it looks like. And that includes putting in what we believe are going to be your development revenue starting in FY16. FY 2020, we took your downtown area, which has a 0.45 FAR, we doubled it, and we said that's what you need to do over the next 3 years. That generates about $1.8 million. When you add on all the other development revenue from the preceding years, you get almost $6 million in revenue, in new revenue.
Mr. Mayor, quick question. So, putting a couple of these charts together, in 2020, where we have a projected budget of $102 million, that's what the projections are, we've got a deficit of $5 million. Now, what's the percentage, the deficit percentage of 5 versus 107 million versus traditional deficits? In other words, when you look at this chart, and I don't favor deficits, and I'm just saying that, but that particular chart, particular 15, is totally out of context with regard to what we just saw on the slide before. So I just want to point out that there are some disconnections here.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I mean, a lot of these things, especially these years out, 2020, it's a pretty good ways out. I mean, to me, there's a lot of speculation, both as to revenue, expenditures, all sorts of things.
Yes, but what this does point out is that there is a structural imbalance. Please keep in mind that you funded your 15 budget not altogether with revenues. You funded it with your capital reserve, and you funded it with fund balance. Whatever you use to fund operations with carries over to the next year. So if there's any increase in cost and not a corresponding increase with revenue, the deficit grows. I just showed you that your pay-go, you run out of money with your capital reserve, which increases your capital cost by $1 million that you have no funding for. When you add that to your operational deficits, that's how you get to $6 million.
Well, let's get to, there's a couple more slides that show a couple of other illustrations that I think might be helpful, and then.
All right, so if we wanted to eliminate the gap without an increase in the tax rate, here's one illustration of how you could do that. You could say that expenditures will not outpace your economic growth.
And so I think this is actually one of the more helpful slides, just because what this does is if you take the assumptions of the last 3 years of revenue growth and then you add to it economic development, with the big increase of $6 million in 2017 because of the reserve and the Terrace Teeter, and then you overlay all the debt service from our capital improvements program, then our budgets can grow in FY16, the schools can grow at 3%, general government can grow at 3%. In FY17, we have a better revenue picture, so the 5.1% and 6.1%, those are, pretty historically pretty good growth numbers, and still have a balanced budget. So what this basically simplifies things down to say, if you pay all your debt service, what do you have left over for your operating budgets? And this answers that question. And so we're trying to just control for a couple of things so you can see some things. So I think this one actually is a fairly helpful look just for planning purposes.
And when you say pay all the debt service, you are still factoring in a $100 million high school.
In 2020, the first
Spread out over several years, but
Right.
the
With
first
the first
payment,
tranche.
the first tranche is $40
is in
million.
2020. It's
But
about-
your mindset is we're going to pay $100 million for that high school, which we all know we're not going to do. But I'm not to say that to quibble, but that is a big assumption. We're going to earn some of that $100 million with the economic development.
Yes,
that we're
we will,
doing up there. But we don't know how much.
Right, and by the time 2020 gets here, if you have enough to offset the $40 million, then we've done very well.
Yeah, or even a
So
significant part of it.
we're not assuming the whole $100 million in 2020. We tried to be very conservative and say, we'll do the first tranche of $40 million. All right,
Let's keep
because you're
going.
going to have to get started.
Gotcha.
All right. Illustration number 2. And what this shows you is if you did nothing and we followed the trends and we said we're going to fund the budget with a tax rate increase.
Gotcha.
There you have it.
All right.
Illustration 3, a compromise. Half is based on revenue growth and half is based on the tax rate.
Okay.
All right, so your issues for consideration. Do you raise taxes to cover your expenditure growth trends? Do you limit expenditure growth to revenue growth from the economy, or do you do some combination? The C&I equivalent. To get the maximum amount of your C&I equivalent, you need $950,000. Currently,
C&I equivalent is what?
that is your transportation contribution. That's your 30% match. We've been doing 800,000. Again, the equivalent, the maximum equivalent is 950,000. A decision needs to be made because, number one, funding it from capital reserves is not sustainable, as you saw, and debt funding is not the best option either. The use of capital reserves and proffers. Do you use your capital reserves now, or do you cash fund your facility projects later? What is the most effective use of your school proffers? And your debt strategy. All right, do you want to borrow the maximum amount of money while interest rates are low and keep cash reserves for the future? Use of the water proceeds. Another option. All right, the $770,000 will reduce the annual ARC that you're required, and the $830,000 reduces your debt service over a 20-year period.
So nothing that you've shown up to date on any of these slides takes into consideration use the water sale proceeds. Is that
That's
right?
correct. We offer it only as things for council to consider going forward. Again, this presentation was to show you where we are, give you some idea of where we're going, and to pose these questions as we approach our budget cycle.
That's it.
That's the story.
Okay, thank you. If we have any brief questions, I think this is really intended as an update, not for extensive discussion, but whet your appetite for discussions to come. But if there's anything that needs to be said now, maybe we could have a brief comment, but keep on trucking. Ms. Oliver?
I guess I would just make the comment that when we come to the part of the budget process where we're giving budget guidance, that we achieve consensus issue by issue and not throw all of these issues into one document that people swallow because they agree with half of it, and then we run into issues with people not liking the assumptions used to develop the budget.
Any other comments? Mr. Snyder?
This is a very useful presentation. I think we shouldn't lose sight that there are a couple basic questions that the citizens are asking. Why is your tax rate 130 and why is Arlington's 99 or 101 or whatever it is? And so that's one fundamental question which we get repeatedly, and which it's going to be very important that in addition to the comparative minutiae here, important as it is, that we go back and we listen carefully to what are the fundamental questions that are on people's minds. Number one, why is your rate so different from Arlington and Fairfax? The underlying, not just numbers, but the underlying reasons. And secondly, from my standpoint, working with the community so they have a better understanding of the total context in which we operate. That is, lack of state funding for education and a series of other things. So that would be a second point. And the third point is what a little bit of this presentation is tonight, which is trend lines over time. If it's 130 today, is it going to be what in the future? But again, that what has so many presumptions in it that it can be easily, depending on which assumption you change, you can make all kinds of political arguments. What I'd like to do is try to listen very carefully to what concerns have been expressed to us by our citizens and try to answer those questions in the next go-around with this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Or what?
Just to add to that, I would say that's a very important observation, and that I hope that we can all engage in that process starting not tonight because it's late, but sooner than, the February-March timetable, because, when we're trying to talk about long-term, we have to have kind of a longer conversation, and I think, right now, or shortly after right now, is a good time to look at charts like the one on gap closure in illustration 1 and understand that operating expenses are going to have to be constrained, I think, in the short term until economic development is able to feed more into our budget. And that's just an important message from my end, at least, that the community needs to hear and either accept or reject before we get into the teeth of the budget process.
Are there any other comments on this issue? Seeing none. Let me ask lastly, there was some discussion last time about having a further discussion about committee structure, et cetera. That didn't make it on the initial agenda. I think it was really miscommunication between the city manager and myself, but it was intended to be on the agenda tonight. Do folks want to talk about that this evening at this hour, or is that something that people
Well, I
prefer
was
to-
actually, if I may, I was
Sure.
going to ask, what now? What does the Budget Finance Committee do next with this information? Do you want us to meet? In some context, I would like to know what we're going to do about organization so that we know whether to schedule a separate Budget Finance meeting later this month or to co-locate it with a work session or some third option.
All right, well, it sounds like that begs the question of maybe what are we going to do? And so that would, I guess, invite a discussion about the issue at this time. Does anyone else feel differently, or would anyone like to further elaborate? Ms. Oliver?
I don't know that we necessarily have the energy to discuss it this evening, but I think we need to take a decision very soon. And I don't know how people feel about putting a decision on the September 22nd agenda if we haven't had a discussion, but we can't just keep putting this off because so much of how we're trying to organize our workload is dependent on how we're going forward with this.
I think it's on the October 8th work session. I mean, that's what it's showing up on the calendar.
It was intended to be on tonight's work session, but again, miscommunication or misunderstanding between the city manager and myself had it on that, which was intended to be the council liaison discussion, but not the discussion about council organization and committees, et cetera. But anyway, that's how it ended up on the agenda as it is. But we can discuss it now, or we can discuss it on the 22nd. I think in some ways it's better for a work session, or more appropriate for a work session than a regular meeting. But I'm not set against that one or the other. Other people have thoughts on this? I know it's late.
I guess my only point was that I don't just want to schedule the discussion, I want to schedule the decision, because I feel like it's starting to affect our ability to get work done because we're not sure how we're going to do it.
Why don't we just decide on the 20th or on the 8th?
Others? Shazee is nodding his head. Conley, what do you
So the
think?
Budget and Finance Committee normally would meet on September the 23rd. So
Go ahead and meet, and we'll discuss the committee, and I would like the advocates of change, I would like one-on-one conversations in addition to the public conversations. Well, I want it all to be public, but I want to know more from the advocates of change, why they feel this change and what it will do.
Okay, so are we scheduling this then for October, was it 8th? All right. Okay, that's it then. Is there anything else that we need to be discussed, comments? Anything from city council members?
I have a calendaring issue.
Sure.
I'll be out Monday.
Okay.
One other scheduling issue, one of our citizens, before tonight, but one of our citizens made the comment that at the town halls, that the meetings so far on the development at Broad and West, there's not been adequate opportunity for the citizens themselves to say what they want to say about the development, because a lot of it was a presentation. So my question is, and I promise to ask this, when are the citizens going to have all the time that they want to discuss what's on their minds with regard to that development and not sit through another presentation?
Well, I mean, let me just start by talking about that town hall that was had. The idea behind that was that it was really the developer's town hall. It's an opportunity for the developer and the citizens to speak directly to themselves without being filtered through a formal hearing process where you have to stand up and state your name. You only get 3 minutes and, intimidating to some folks. And so that was the idea behind it. It was intended not to be run by the city, but run by the developer. I was there, half the people in this room were there, and frankly, it just wasn't run as effectively as it could be. And I don't know why it wasn't as effective as it could be, but it really was somewhat chaotic and ineffective. So there's a meeting tonight, which obviously most of us, didn't hear most of it, so we don't know how that went. But I'm all for having more meetings and facilitating more discussion. And it very well may be appropriate to have another town hall, maybe this time facilitated by a third party, either outside third party or someone on staff who can make sure it's run better than it was, because it wasn't run well the first meeting.
But Mr. Mayor, the deficiency in that meeting, I think we'd all agree, was not that the public did not have enough opportunity to speak. I mean, to be fair and objective, if anything, that was the strength of it, was that the people who were opposed to it spoke a lot at the beginning, and the people who were more supportive of it spoke a lot at the end. I mean, I thought it was, in the end, a pretty good civic exercise. I think, the challenge that we face is that some people are being listened to, but perhaps they're not being agreed with. And, that's just a challenge that we always face. But certainly, more meetings to discuss this are better.
Well, go ahead.
If I could just make one other comment. Every committee, board and commission I've been at where the subject has come up, there have been citizens that have used the public comment portion at the beginning to make their points heard. And I watched more than one board allow citizens to ask questions during their meeting. So, and it's some of the same people showing up, and I think there is some of this. It's not that they're not getting heard, it's that they're not getting agreed with. And there's a difference there.
That being said, I mean, I think that the developer is intending to present revised plans in the next couple of weeks. I don't know the exact date. But I think when that comes in, it would be appropriate to disseminate that information in a way that people have a chance to have more one-on-one contact. I think having some sort of facilitation so the meeting is not as chaotic as the town hall was would be appropriate and useful to everyone. But I'm all for all that. So I think, why don't we see what comes in as far as the developers' revisions to what they propose, and take a look at it. If it's the same thing, then that's one thing. If it's different, or substantially different, then obviously we want to make sure that people have a chance to see what's going on. So why don't we reserve judgment on how to proceed, but I'm all for another town hall meeting, maybe a little bit better run next time. Mr. Z?
Yeah, I think that we're clearly going through different stages of how our community is addressing the development. So I'm kind of okay with that chaotic format at the very beginning. Wait for people to clarify how they want to, at the end, when we have a more solid project and a more solid opinion of what the solid project looks like. I think it'll be a more formal process at the time. I think this is all a very useful exercise. And I think those of us that have attended these meetings have heard a lot of things that we wouldn't have heard otherwise. So, that's useful for us as well.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Oliver, then Ms. Conley.
And I just want to add a comment that I've made to staff earlier. I think that some of the boards and commissions are concerned that because the process is in a state of flux and they have this sense that they have to provide their comments very early in the process when the project isn't final, they're asking for a second chance to comment. So they'll provide their initial comments, which are guidance, and then they're being told in some cases that they have to bless or curse the project, and they're not ready to do that yet.
I would say in response to that, and I've talked to the city manager about this, to me, the developer does this at its own peril. In other words, if they want to delay making changes to a very late time in the process, they've indicated they need to get this an up or down in December. The fact is, though, when you wait to make your changes to a later point, you don't give people an opportunity to be heard. To me, you run the risk that your case will not be heard in December, because I think people have a right to be heard. And so I intend to schedule and conduct hearings such that people have a full opportunity to observe, comment, respond, et cetera, to whatever may come in. So I hope that's being conveyed to the developer, the idea that, they can just sort of wait till the end to make all the changes. I think it may impact their schedule as well. So I agree with what you're saying, and I think it is appropriate that everyone have a chance to comment on the final product. Ms. Conley?
Just two thoughts on citizen comment. One is that during the public hearing time of city council meetings, we can say ahead of time, feel free to come and speak about this at a city council meeting, because I think people may not be thinking of that public comment period as a time to do that. And the second one is there's also a way to use websites to allow people to submit comments, not so that they're blog comments and people are commenting on comments and then things devolve, but just to submit comments through the website. I think there is a way to do that so that they get to city council and to the developer.
I mean, ultimately, to me, I think having a one-on-one conversation or dialogue with the people in interest is really the ultimate goal. And so I think all of us want to facilitate that to the extent we're able to. And I think really at this point, the next step is in the developer's hands to come back with a revised proposal, and then we'll disseminate that information as best we can to get comments back in a timely fashion. So any other comments for tonight's meeting? Okay, why don't we go ahead and adjourn our meeting and move to adjourn. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, opposed, abstentions, so we're adjourned.